Hey guys, Sam from Sweetcorn Man back with another video. The Sweetcorn History segment in this video will be on the Compromise of 1850. The presidential election of 1848 took place on November 7th, 1848. This was the first United States presidential election where voting was done on one day, which we now call Election Day. There were 290 members of the Electoral College, and 146 electoral votes were needed to win. For the Democrats, President James K. Polk of Tennessee declined to run for re-election, as he had promised he would only serve one term during the campaign of 1844, which is a detail I forgot to mention. Polk became the first president to refuse to run for a second term. The Democratic candidates for the presidential nomination were Vice President George Mifflin Dallas of Pennsylvania, Secretary of State James Buchanan of Pennsylvania, Supreme Court Justice Levi Woodbury of New Hampshire, U.S. Senator John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, U.S. Senator Lewis Cass of Michigan, Major General William J. Worth of Texas, former President Martin Van Buren of New York, and former U.S. Representative William O. Butler of Kentucky. The Democratic National Convention was held from May 22, 1848 to May 25, 1848 in Baltimore, Maryland. The chairman was former Minister to the United Kingdom Andrew Stevenson of Virginia. Before the delegates could vote on a candidate, Van Buren withdrew from the election. Cass won the most votes but failed to win two-thirds of the vote required by the convention for the nomination. Therefore, another ballot was cast. It was not until the fourth ballot that a candidate won a majority, and that candidate was Cass, causing Stevenson to declare Cass the Democratic Party's nominee for president. The candidates for the vice presidential nomination were Secretary of the Navy John Y. Mason of Virginia, U.S. Representative James I. McKay of North Carolina, U.S. Senator Jefferson Davis of Mississippi, Inspector General of the Tennessee Militias Levin Hudson Coe, former Minister of France William R. King of Alabama, and former acting governor of Mississippi John A. Quitman. William O. Butler was also considered. Butler won the most votes, but he failed to gain the votes of two-thirds of the delegates, which were required by the convention for the nomination as stated previously. As such, a second vote was held, and Butler reached the 170 votes needed and was declared the Democratic vice presidential nominee. Van Buren and his supporters were outraged over the nomination of Cass and Butler. Therefore, Van Buren and his supporters left the Democratic Party. For the Liberty Party, the Liberty candidates for president were U.S. Senator John P. Hale of New Hampshire and activist Gerrit Smith of New York. The Liberty Convention was held in October of 1847 in Syracuse, New York. There, Hale won the nomination, winning 103 votes to Smith's 41. For vice president, the party nominated former Ohio State Senator Leicester King. Therefore, the Liberty ticket was John P. Hale for president and Leicester King for vice president. For the Whigs, the Whig candidates for president were Supreme Court Justice John McClain of Ohio, U.S. Senator Daniel Webster of Massachusetts, U.S. Senator John Clayton of Delaware, Commanding General of the U.S. Army Winfield Scott of New Jersey, Major General Zachary Taylor of Louisiana, and former U.S. Senator Henry Clay of Kentucky. The Whig National Convention was held on June 7, 1848, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Although Taylor received the most votes on the first ballot, he did not receive the one-half majority of delegates required to win the nomination. On the fourth ballot, Taylor won 171 votes, passing the one-half majority required by the convention. Scott won 63, Clay 32, and Webster 14. Neither Clayton nor McClain won votes on the fourth ballot. As Taylor had not attended the convention, the Whigs sent him a letter to notify him of his nomination, postage due. However, Taylor had told the post office not to send him any letters without postage, as he would have to pay a lot of money for the postage for all of them. Therefore, Taylor was unaware of his nomination until the Whigs sent him a second letter with the postage paid. The candidates for the vice presidential nomination were, alright, get prepared, there are a lot of candidates here. Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives Robert Winthrop of Massachusetts, Governor of New York John Young, Lieutenant Governor of New York Hamilton Fish, U.S. Representative Andrew Stewart of Pennsylvania, U.S. Representative Thomas B. King of Georgia, Comptroller of New York Millard Fillmore, Massachusetts Legislator George Lunt, Vermont State Representative Solomon Foote, former Secretary of the Treasury Thomas Ewing of Ohio, former Governor of New York William H. Seward, former U.S. Representative John Sargent of Pennsylvania, former U.S. Representative Thomas McKinnon of Pennsylvania, former U.S. Representative Abbott Lawrence of Massachusetts, former U.S. Senator Rufus Choate of Massachusetts, former U.S. Senator George Evans of Maine, and former New York legislator Thurlow Weed, alongside Senator Clayton. With the first vote failing to nominate a candidate, a second vote was held nominating Fillmore for the vice presidency. However, not everyone was pleased with the Whig ticket. A few anti-slavery Whigs, unsatisfied with Taylor, who was a slaveholder, left the party. Joining the Van Burenites and some in the Liberty Party, they formed the Free Soil Party, which opposed the expansion of slavery but stopped short of calling for its abolition. They advocated for the passage of the Wilmot Proviso, which would have banned slavery in all territories acquired during the Mexican-American War. The creation of the Free Soil Party led to some problems for the Liberty Party, as both Hale, who actually helped to establish the Free Soil Party, and King withdrew from the election, joining the Free Soil Party. Therefore, as a backup, the Liberty Party nominated Gerrit Smith for president alongside Reverend Charles Foote of Michigan for vice president. As for the Free Soilers, their candidates for president were U.S. Representative Joshua Giddings of Ohio and former Massachusetts State Senator Charles Francis Adams of Massachusetts. Hale and Van Buren also ran for the party's nomination. Van Buren won the presidential nomination, and the party nominated Adams for vice president. The Free Soilers were optimistic, believing that Van Buren could win the North and deadlock the election, throwing it into the House of Representatives. However, Van Buren himself realized that he could not win and instead focused on preventing Cass from winning. Van Buren was bitter towards Cass and thought the idea of popular sovereignty, which Cass supported, was ludicrous. The Free Soilers also began the both parties are the same argument that some third parties still use in American politics today. For the issue of slavery, the Democrats expressed support for popular sovereignty, or the idea that citizens of a state or territory should be able to directly vote on its legality. The Democrats also voiced opposition for the Wilmot Proviso and attacked Taylor as semi-literate. The Liberty Party once again stood for the abolition of slavery, but this time they also had something new. Support for women's suffrage, or the right of women to vote, was also advocated by the Whig Party. Although Taylor was running as a Whig, his political ideology did not exactly line up with the party's. Taylor instead labeled himself as an independent and likened his political ideology to that of an old-school Jeffersonian Republican. He opposed high tariffs, internal improvements, and a national bank, all Whig initiatives. However, Taylor did agree with the Whigs on the idea that a president should not have too much power and that the current power of the presidency should be limited. And like many Whigs, Taylor was a strong nationalist and was opposed to the spoils system. The Whigs used this to paint Taylor as a bipartisan independent thinker. They also emphasized his heroics during the Mexican-American War, specifically the Battle of Buena Vista. Luckily for Taylor, the split in the Whig Party was not nearly as big as the one in the Democratic Party, and as such, he refrained from commenting on the Wilmot Proviso, as he had the support of Southerners as well as Northerners like U.S. Representative Abraham Lincoln and an Ohio lawyer named Rutherford Burchard Hayes, who did not defect to their Free Soil Party, and Taylor didn't want to alienate either side. The results. As stated earlier, this was the first election where Election Day actually took place, as opposed to several weeks or even months. As such, the winner of this election would be the first winner elected in November. With that out of the way, Zachary Taylor won the election, winning 163 electoral votes from New York, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Kentucky, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Georgia, Maryland, New Jersey, Connecticut, Louisiana, Vermont, Rhode Island, Delaware, and Florida. Taylor won 1,360,235 popular votes, or 47.28% of the total. Cass won 127 electoral votes from Ohio, Virginia, Indiana, South Carolina, Alabama, Illinois, Maine, Missouri, Mississippi, New Hampshire, Michigan, Iowa, Texas, Wisconsin, and Arkansas. This was the first time a Democrat won Ohio since 1832. Cass won 1,222,353 popular votes, or 42.49% of the total. Had the Democrats not split and had Cass won all of Van Buren's votes, he would have won the election. Van Buren did extremely well for a third-party candidate. Although he did not win any electoral votes, he won 10.13% of the popular vote and even outdid Cass in a few states. Gerrit Smith did poorly, only managing to win 2,545 popular votes, 0.09% of the total, all from his home state of New York. 210 people wrote in candidates. 89 of those write-ins were for Henry Clay and were all from Illinois. Taylor and Fillmore were inaugurated on March 5, 1849, making Taylor the first president elected without any prior political experience. Alright, time for Week 1 history. After the failure of the Wilmot Proviso in the Senate, the question of slavery in the Mexican Cession was still open. The issue became even more looming when the California Gold Rush occurred, causing thousands of settlers to enter the western part of the Mexican Cession, known as California. The Californians adopted a constitution that outlawed slavery and applied for statehood. Taylor, although a slaveholder himself, supported the admission of California as a free state. Taylor also supported taking the rest of the Mexican Cession and turning it into the states of Utah and New Mexico. In his report to Congress at the end of 1849, which we now call the State of the Union, he endorsed the idea of creating states from the Mexican Cession. A bitter debate broke out in Congress, with some Southerners, such as Senator John Calhoun, threatening to secede from the Union if California were to be admitted as a free state. Taylor threatened to hang any congressman who suggested leaving the United States. Alongside the presidential election in 1848, there were also congressional elections, and one of the new senators elected was none other than our good friend Henry Clay. Clay, known as the Great Compromiser, devised a new compromise, which he introduced in January of 1850. To please the North, the compromise included California's admission as a free state, the abolition of the slave trade in Washington, D.C., and Texas redrawing its borders, giving up some of its land. To please the South, the question of slavery in the proposed territories of New Mexico and Utah is left up to popular sovereignty. Texas receives $10 million to pay off its debt, and a stricter version of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793. Of everything, the most controversial part was the Fugitive Slave Act. The law required Northerners to help Southern slave catchers get escaped slaves. Slave catchers could label any African American they saw as slave, and the African Americans had no recourse. They could be brought to a federal magistrate, but the magistrate would receive more money for ruling the accused a slave. The prospect of the law horrified many Northern abolitionists and even some Northern moderates. The compromise was also unpopular with some Southerners, who disliked that it would admit California as a free state. What did President Taylor think of the compromise? He absolutely hated it. Taylor thought the compromise would allow the spread of slavery and give the South more power. Southerners were angry at Taylor, feeling he had betrayed them. Taylor probably would have vetoed the bill, but unfortunately for him, he never got the chance. Taylor attended an Independence Day celebration on July 4th, 1850. There, he drank iced milk and ate raw fruits. Taylor fell ill and was diagnosed with cholera morbus. 5 days later, Taylor was dead at 65, the second U.S. president to die in office. Some speculated that he was poisoned by outraged Southerners. With Taylor gone, Millard Fillmore became president. Unlike Taylor, Fillmore was a supporter of the compromise, believing it to be the only hope if the United States were to stay together, and he signed it. Proponents of the compromise hoped it would hold the country together. However, it had the exact opposite effect, and the deep division in the nation furthered. Northern opposition to slavery increased, seeing the effects of the Fugitive Slave Act firsthand and the evils of slavery. The law would inspire a woman named Harriet Beecher Stowe to write the book Uncle Tom's Cabin, which showed the horrors of slavery. Although Southerners denounced it as propaganda, it helped turn many Northerners towards abolitionism. Towards the abolitionist cause. I don't know if abolitionism is a word. The country was now truly divided. Whig versus Democrat, anti-slavery versus pro-slavery, brother against brother. While the compromise was able to put off a civil war for the time being, it would start a chain of events that 11 years later would culminate in the American Civil War. Thanks for watching, and check out the Discord server if you haven't. The link is in the description. See ya.